Hello and welcome everyone to today's video. Today we're going to be going over our lounge emergency procedures, including our evacuation and medical emergency procedures. Thank you so much for joining us. In today's video, we're going to be going over our emergency procedures for evacuation, medical emergencies, and other disturbances at the Music Hall Lounge. Part 1. Evacuation. In the case of an emergency involving the safety of patrons, artists, or any other personnel in the building, the front of house staff will function as the emergency supervisors. All procedures will be managed through these supervisors. Person number 1, front of house staff. This is the highest ranking front of house staff member in the building, whether that's a house manager, the assistant general manager, or the general manager. Their job is to exit the building and make way to the control area in front of the building, grabbing a radio as you exit if possible. The control area for the front of the building is outside of MN Pastries. There, you will meet with city emergency personnel, meet up with the production point of contact, and visually and by radio check in with the other points of refuge. This position is the head communicator for all points of refuge. You will report back to production to determine when patrons are safe to re-enter the building. Once the music hall has been told by the city's emergency personnel that an emergency is over, production, along with the other music hall staff on duty, will decide whether or not the lounge can proceed with the show. Front of house, box office, and production should all grab emergency radios on their way out to be able to communicate with all points of refuge. All other front of house staff on duty will exit the building as quickly as possible and assist in the establishment of points of refuge. There are 2 points of refuge for the lounge: Congress Street and Maplewood in front of Jimmy's Jazz Club. This is for anyone who exits out the front door. We expect that most patrons will exit this way, as it is the way that they came in. Box office will likely be at this point of refuge with their radio. The Worth Lot. This is for kitchen staff, runners, production, and artists, and any other patrons who may have been downstairs or in the bathroom at the time of evacuation. Kitchen staff and runners should call out to the bathrooms to inform them of an evacuation before safely exiting the building. All other front of house staff, including bartenders, other full-time and part-time staff, should evacuate through the nearest exit and make their way to the nearest point of refuge. The stage manager. The stage manager will make a stage announcement if needed to stop the performance and make their way to the control area. For any other production staff on duty, the PA and house lights will go into emergency mode. Your job is to evacuate via the nearest possible exit. If possible, alert all tour staff and artists to leave the building and meet at a point of refuge. Note, do not risk your personal safety. When the alarm is pulled, your number 1 priority is to evacuate safely. Do not re-enter the building until given the all clear. Volunteers. Volunteers should make their way to the nearest possible exit, directing patrons to follow. The first 2 volunteers to exit through the front entrance should assist in establishing a point of refuge on the corner of Maplewood and Congress in front of Jimmy's Jazz Club. Please be available to answer any questions that patrons may have. Non-operational staff responsibilities. If you are non-operational staff and you are in the building during a lounge performance, please evacuate immediately and head to the nearest possible point of refuge. If you are able to help patrons keep calm and answer any questions, we would greatly appreciate it. Policies and procedures. If you see the early signs of an emergency but there is no immediate danger to persons in the building, please seek out one of these emergency supervisors and they will determine how to proceed. If it is determined that it is a true emergency, the alarm must be triggered. Volunteers should go immediately to their designated emergency exits to confirm safe and clear passage for patrons in their area and proceed through the exit themselves. It is essential that these volunteers ask patrons to move out of the street and into the point of refuge while awaiting an announcement. All volunteers and other staff should remain with their evacuation group of patrons to await further directions from either emergency personnel or emergency supervisor on staff. Please try to answer any questions that patrons may have. Once the head of the point of refuge has control of the situation, they should ask that volunteers are dispersed through the crowd of patrons to be available to answer questions and keep calm. If the fire department determines that it is safe to return to the building and proceed with the event, an announcement will be made to all the volunteers by staff emergency supervisors. You should then assist in the re-entry and seating of all patrons. Once all patrons and artists are back in the building, the stage manager or the house manager will make an announcement with any explanations and thanks that are necessary. The event will then proceed. If it is determined that the building may not be re-entered, an announcement will be made outside in the points of refuge, and volunteers should assist in safely getting patrons dispersed. Please make sure to keep all patrons out of the street and enable the passage of emergency vehicles. A house manager will assign a volunteer at the points of refuge to answer questions as patrons are leaving and take down any information about personal items that are remaining in the building. If items are retrieved after the emergency, we will contact their owners and let them know when they can pick them up at the box office. If any patron has been injured during an evacuation, you must inform an emergency supervisor immediately so they can notify the authorities for assistance. Once it is determined that a patron needs medical assistance, at least one volunteer should remain with that patron until the emergency personnel is available. Crew and volunteers may not leave after an emergency without first checking in with the emergency supervisors. There may be a need for your assistance in information gathering required by the authorities. Part 2. Medical emergencies. In case of a medical emergency, the front of house will take lead. If there is a medical issue in the back of house or with an employee, please alert front of house for assistance. Front of house. If possible, move the patron to a place where they are protected from the view of other patrons and can wait for an ambulance if needed. Never attempt to move anyone who is unable to move on their own, especially if they have an injury to the head, neck, or back. If the person is unable to be secluded from the crowd, it is up to the production team to determine if the event should be halted. If an ambulance is being called, production should stop the show and instruct other patrons via the God mic to please leave at least 6 feet of space around the patrons suffering a medical issue. If a medical emergency arises, front of house will instruct the box office to call 911 and will follow all instructions given by the operator. Remember your CPR training. Check to see if the person is responsive. Instruct someone to call 911. If CPR is required, begin chest compressions. 30 compressions. Breathe 2 breaths, watch the patient's chest to make sure air is going in, and repeat steps until help arrives. Other front of house staff. Please clear a path from the front door to the patron if the emergency is occurring in the main room. Volunteers. Please assist the other front of house staff in clearing a path to the front door and assist in keeping other patrons away from the emergency situation. Please do not crowd anyone who is suffering an emergency medical situation. If you are the first to notice the situation, please stay with the patron suffering the medical emergency and instruct another volunteer to get help. If no other volunteers are in the vicinity, please find a house manager immediately. Part 3. Disturbance. In the event of a patron who is causing a disturbance. If a patron is causing a disturbance and the front of house team has determined they need to leave, we will first ask them politely to go. If the patron refuses, box office will call 911 and the police will be able to remove them. If the patron is acting violently, call 911 immediately and try to de-escalate the situation if possible, but never at personal risk to yourself. Once the patron has been moved outside, close the blinds if necessary and lock the door if necessary. In the event of a disturbance that has stopped the show, a house manager will make an announcement to the crowd apologizing for the inconvenience. House managers will be available after the show to answer questions if patrons have them, but will try to be vague as to not alarm or embarrass anyone. Other important information. There will be 3 emergency radios located at the lounge, one behind the bar, one at the box office, and one in the production booth. Please use these radios whenever an emergency situation arises. And remember, the most important thing in an emergency situation is to keep calm and remember your training. Thank you so much for listening to today's video, and we hope to see you again soon.